while people are just finding their seats, we're going to begin. Tonight is called Think, Sweat and Eat Green. And of course, green is not just green. Green is the new black. This is what we want to focus on. It's what is current. And before we even start, I want to point out that each one of tonight's speakers could actually have their own night in a 3-part series. And the truth is, each one of tonight's speakers could actually have their own series in a year-long set of programs that we could be running here. And the truth is, if it was up to me, we would. I'm not sure if they'd be as amenable to it. But the way that we live our lives, I'm not sure how amenable most of us would be. We'd say yes. If I said we're going to now sign up for a year with these 3 exclusively, you'd be like, yeah, where's the dotted line? I'm in. And next week we'd get emails to the office of, I'm in, but this week I've got something really important. I can't make it. So we've made the choice to actually bring the 3 presenters together tonight because it's about starting. And it's about having a holistic approach to how we live. Some of the faces in the room have been here before. I've seen you, and you'll come to a particular program and you say, oh, that was fantastic. Such an important speaker. That is one of the best pediatricians you've ever had here. I now know exactly what I'm going to do with my child. Or that was one of the best naturopaths you've ever had present. Or that was one of the best meditations you've ever done. Or that Kabbalah class gave me so meaning. And the truth is, all those compliments are important, and we need that as an organization. But in life, we actually need to be exposed to multiple things, because when we live life, we're actually operating on multiple levels at the same time. We have 6 cardinal principles that we believe people should be very deliberate in being aware of in their life. And that is how we eat, how we sleep, that we do practice mindfulness, that we do have a spirituality and a value system, that we do exercise, and that we do have some time management. Now, we're not going to have all 6 covered tonight, but we can at least cover 3 of those. How we're eating, how we're moving, and how we're thinking. And that way we walk off, according to Spiritgrow, 50% better. 50%. So tonight's about snapshots, 20, 25 minutes per speaker, so that you can walk off with 1 or 2 simple and ready to implement messages. And that way we can actually begin. One of the biggest issues that we have is today we've got access to so much information that we've got information overload and this absolute fear of drowning. We're never going to be able to achieve this. We're never going to be able to do this. It's all so much. I've got to cut sugar out, and I've got to have more fats, and I've got to do this exercise, and I've got to do high resistance and low resistance, and I've got to sit, and I've got to be quiet, and then I've got to stand, and I've got to be conscious. It's too much. It's too much. And therefore, I'm going to allow Craig to open tonight. Professor Craig Hassett is one of the world's leaders in mindfulness. Yes, he is local, and yes, he teaches at one of the universities here. But he has made incredible dents in wellness around the world. And he is the most appropriate person to open tonight, not only because he presents here and so kindly every single year, over and over again, always with a smile, but he is the one who's going to allow us to not feel anxious by all the things we're going to learn tonight. And so therefore, I'd like to thank and welcome Dr. Craig Hassett to the front.
Well, thank you very much. I was invited to speak about mental health tonight, so I guess that's the think part of it. So I'll be referring a little bit to mindfulness, but I'll be referring to a number of other things. So I will be sort of segueing into the talks on nutrition and exercise, but looking at a whole of lifestyle approach to good mental health and well-being. And just like the body is always trying to get itself back to balance and harmony, so is the mind. And, physical health in the body, well, I guess the healthy mind, the mind is always moving in that direction if we help it along the way rather than getting in the way of it. So I'm going to be speaking about the essence of mental health. And ESSENCE is an acronym. I spend most of my time teaching at Monash University, especially the medical students. And in my experience, you can't teach medical students anything unless it's based on an acronym. All right, it's all about acronyms. Most of the time, the faculty are out the back just creating acronyms and then try and find some curriculum to put into them. So, all right. So this is the real reason dinosaurs became extinct. It had nothing to do with climate change. It wasn't asteroids or anything like that. It was lifestyle related. Nothing has changed over the last 100 million years. Now, we should be interested in mental health because it's such an important issue, and our mental health collectively hasn't been going in the right direction for a long time. This is Public Library of Science paper. They're the biggest medical journal in the world pretty much, and crunched a massive amount of data to try and predict what are going to be the developed world's 10 top burdens of disease by the year 2030. Big issues for planning and everything else. So this is how far ahead depression is expected to be as the developed world's #1 burden of disease. And just more and more antidepressants are not turning this around, which is not to say a person with major depression shouldn't have antidepressants, but it's clearly not the solution to the underlying problems. And then you've got heart disease, dementia, alcohol abuse, diabetes, and so on. This is all lifestyle and mental health related, all right? So that's what's really getting us these days. Perhaps if you went back a couple of 100 years, not enough nutrition and poverty and all of these kinds of things. Well, these days we're, in a sense, have too much food and too much luxury and so on, and that's really not good for us. Now, Essence of Health. ESSENCE is an acronym. It stands for Education, Stress Management. So that's the mindfulness and mind-body area. Spirituality. So where do you find meaning and purpose in life? Exercise, nutrition, connectedness. So that's our social support, relationships, sense of community, and the importance of a healthy environment. So that's the essence of health. It's the essence of preventing or managing chronic illness. You do all the medical things you can, but if we're not doing those things as well, we're not going to get a good outcome. So let's look at this. Now, just to mention briefly, we do teach our medical students about all this. So this is a part of their core curriculum. So by the end of tonight, you can get some credits to do, you finish your first year of medicine at Monash if you want to, and you can just finish off at last bits. But it's a mindfulness-based lifestyle program, this, and what we found was by the end of the program, the students, 90% of the students said, I'm personally applying this in my own life. I'm practicing mindfulness, I'm changing my lifestyle for better. We looked at their mental health and well-being in a low-stress period prior to doing the program. And they had average mental health for 18-year-olds, in the general community. We measured their mental health and well-being after they completed the program, but immediately prior to mid-year exams. Now, we should have seen stress and anxiety and depression go off the scale. We should have seen quality of life go down, because there's never been, among the thousands of studies that have looked at this, to say anything different. What we found was the opposite of that. Everything we could measure about their mental health and well-being had significantly improved, despite the fact they're in the high-pressure period of semester. So they had significantly better than average mental health after they'd done the program, even despite the fact all the demands were on their shoulders. So let's move through the elements of the program. So this is the animal self-help section of the library. I don't know if you've read any of these wonderful titles, so Do It by Instinct, or Dare to be Nocturnal, or How to Avoid Natural Selection. So anyway, so have a look at some of these wonderful books, but this is the education bit of things. Now, education's very important. Now, having an education, that is going to school, university and so on, is associated with better mental and physical health overall, all right? So, and greater life expectancy as well. So having an education is actually quite good for our health in the usual sense of the word. But having an education is not just going to school and so on, it's also being educated about ourselves, right? So to understand ourselves better, because there's often a serious gap between what we know and what we do. Now, does anybody know that something is good for you but you're not doing it? Put up your hand if you're in that category. Or you know something is not good for you but you keep doing it anyway. All right, so there we are. Let's join the human race. What is going on up here? Like, why the gap between what we know and what we do? So understanding our own psychology, understanding our own motivation, understanding how to make healthy lifestyle change is pretty important. So the whole health psychology of this is a really important prerequisite for being able to make healthy change, even before we think of what's the health information that I need to help me to make those choices well. Now, mindfulness, I think, is one of the best ways we can cultivate a greater ability to be self-aware of the choices we make and to be able to make those choices better. So, but any of these other behaviour change strategies, how to set goals, how to enhance our motivation are really important. Now, and you think you have stress. Now, this little fella here has got a lot of stress in his life, so stress management. Now, I'm not going to be talking about stress and mind, body in great detail, but I'll just mention a little bit about mindfulness. Now, there's so much interest, and of course this whole centre and the name and the dedication to mindfulness is so important, but we're treating it like it's a revolution these days, but this is really old news. And all of the world's great wisdom traditions have known the essential elements of this for thousands of years. And even at the birth of what we call modern psychology, William James, 1890, and this is the first classic textbook in Western psychology, really, the faculty of voluntarily bringing back a wandering attention over and over again is the very root of judgment, character, and will. No one is compos sui, and that's Latin for being a master of themselves. So no one's a master of themselves if he have it not. An education which should improve this faculty would be the education par excellence. So there it was, but the skills and how to do that weren't widely known about or used. Well, now there's a lot of interest in these skills. Now, this time I won't screw up. I won't. Now, it says down the bottom here that Roger screws up. Now, Roger's clearly not paying very good attention to what he's doing. Now, when we're not paying attention, when we're not mindful, we tend to move into a distracted mode of mind, and it's called default mode. So default mode is the inattentive, distracted state of mind. All right, so if you're sitting here, but your mind's still at work, I've got a whole lot of things to do tomorrow, and how will I get through them all, and so on, but you're looking with glazed eyes towards the front of the room, that's default mode. If you're having a conversation with your partner, they're talking, you're nodding and grunting in the appropriate places, but not hearing what they're saying, that's default mode. Anybody here ever been awake at 3 in the morning? And your mind's all over the place, talking to itself, what about this, what about that? Default mode. Worry, depressive rumination, these are all elements of default mode, the distracted mode of mind we go into when we're not mindful. And there's a lot of default mental activity in states like depression and anxiety. We just give it different names like rumination and worry. Now, default mode's associated with, therefore, things like stress and anxiety, depression, ADHD, schizophrenia, and so on, because these circuits that are meant to be grounded, present, connected in the present moment, like here, in reality, as it were, the mind flying off in its own flights of fantasy in the future and the past, not a really helpful or functional state for the mind to be in. So it's associated, too much default mental activity is associated with a whole lot of things that aren't really that useful. Now the applications of mindfulness, here's a scary list for you. Last year there were close to 700 new papers in refereed medical and psychological journals, last year alone. If you went back 10 years, it was about 20 new papers in refereed medical and psychological journals on mindfulness. So last year it was close to 700. Now, the big area has to do with depression, mental health, depression, anxiety, dozens of studies on those now. And whereas there are lesser studies on on ADHD and autism and various things, but it's a generic skill that's got many mental health applications. And then now we now understand that it changes the brain and how it functions. We understand that it's very helpful for coping with a whole range of clinical conditions, cancer, MS, and chronic illnesses, chronic pain, and so on. We now know that it helps people to perform better and function better, like athletes, for example. So many athletes really train their attention and their minds. Education. There's hardly a major school in Melbourne now not actively developing mindfulness curriculum. Relationships, communication, empathy, emotional intelligence, and let's not forget, of course, that the world's great wisdom traditions got there thousands of years ago, so modern science and psychology is a little bit slow in catching up, but we're getting there now. So now I'm going to just focus particularly on the mental health bit. Now, taxidermists never get stressed and depressed. Did you know that? Take it up as a hobby or as a career, taxidermy. And this is why. There are not too many people in the world right now, Gladys, who can go home at the end of the day happy in the knowledge that everything is completely stuffed. So see why they're always so happy, taxidermists. Now, There are literally dozens of studies on this now. I'll give you one study to illustrate the point. 106 people have had multiple episodes of depression before, are divided into two groups in a randomized controlled trial. One group, treatment as usual, standard drug approaches for depression. The other group, you get treatment as usual, but you also get mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. And then they follow the relapse rates over the following year. And this is very typical of the studies. So the red line is the relapse rate for the mindfulness group. So very few people relapsed into depression if they had mindfulness training. The blue is the relapse for treatment as usual. By 12 months, more than half have had their next episode of depression. That's the expected prognosis for treatment as usual, standard drug approaches for depression. This is a game changer. That is a paradigm shift in how we understand depression. Now, it didn't mean that people who learned mindfulness never had a depressive thought come into their mind or a depressive mood or emotion. But what they did was to develop an ability, firstly, to be aware that it's there. It's like a depressive train of thought comes into the mind. It's like, oh, there's that train of thought. But if the person's aware of it and able to stand back from it, not stand in front of the train trying to stop having that thought, but able to stand back from it, then the person develops an ability to make a choice. Do I want to get on the train? Does that make sense? The thought comes into the mind, but whether we engage with it, whether we start to actually elaborate on it, and so on, or whether we just let that train come and go without getting on it, is a very important choice to make. Now, occasionally we do have useful thoughts, not very often. About every 10 or 15 years you'll have a useful thought, and it's very nice to be there when it happens because some thoughts are worth giving attention to, because they're useful. But there's a lot of stuff that's just pointless, going around in circles, and then some stuff that's really not going anywhere that we particularly want to go. So to be able to make that choice is a very important thing. So people who develop mindfulness are able to do that. Default mode, remember I mentioned default mode? Well, default mode switches off mindfulness switches off the default circuits, and it switches on circuits associated with self-monitoring and cognitive control. What that means is the person gets better at noticing, there's the pattern of thought again. Cognitive control, is that really where I want my attention to be? No, I'll just let that thought go and just come back to what I'm doing. Just jiggle the tea bag and the teacup. Just come back to walking down the street, feel the breeze in my face, hear the birds, etc. So a person's able to get back in touch with what's actually happening in the present moment. Now, so this little fella here, no mindfulness training. He's just an in-the-moment kind of guy. The cat has done no mindfulness training either. He's very mindful though. It is a natural state. We were not born distracted. We were not born worrying. That is a habit we get into pretty early in life. So mindfulness is just a natural state, really. Now, do you mind if I strap your phone to my forehead so I can pretend you're looking at me when I talk? Okay. What, is this recognisable to some of the people here? Okay. All right. Now, just another point though. This is quite an important psych journal, and I'll go to the bottom line here. This is just under 2,000 adults, young adults, and they're looking at how much they were using social media, and they found those who used social media the most compared to those who used it the least had about 3 times the rate of depression after they controlled for all the other things they could think of. Now, I'm not going to say social media should, and so on, but some people have an idea that being connected means to have one's attention sucked into a very small screen for just about the whole of their life, and that is producing a profound disconnect with place, with people, etc. And for many people, social media is a way of withdrawing from the world. It's a virtual connection, but if it's at the expense of getting out of the chair, being active, interacting with people and so on, then it comes at a serious cost. So the message here is no social media, but it's like it needs to be used well. And this is very important for parents. Help kids to develop an appropriate or rational or balanced approach to using technology rather than just becoming addicted to it like a lot of kids are these days. Emotional intelligence, these are the 5 domains of emotional intelligence. I'll just make the point that there's a high correlation between mindfulness and emotional intelligence. So mindfulness is the opposite of a disconnect. It helps people to connect, to communicate, to engage with each other. Very important from a social point of view. Now, the late night shopper who started hallucinating. All right, so So in terms of our modern attitudes to lots of things, we live in an increasingly material kind of world. Now, the role of meaning, Carl Jung, the lack of meaning in life is a soul sickness whose full extent and full import our age has not yet begun to comprehend. And I think Carl Jung was onto something. So spirituality is the next S in the model. And spirituality, where do we find meaning and purpose in life? Now, there are a lot of different ways of doing that. Traditionally, through religion, or for some people, not through faith, but through reason and philosophy, or an Albert Einstein through science and wonder, through Fred Hollows, through philanthropy and altruism and so on, or interest in the environment. But it is a basic human need to search for, to express meaning in our lives. And for many people, there's nothing other than materialism is a source for meaning. Now, this is one of the first studies in the late 90s, and the studies since then have pretty much confirmed what this original review paper showed. They looked at over 100 studies looking at if a person has a religious or spiritual dimension to their lives, does it correlate with better or worse health in other ways? They were less likely to get depression and suicide, substance abuse, less physical illness, and a longer life expectancy. So there were about 100 studies, and that was pretty clearly what they showed. That is, it's good for our mental and emotional and physical health as well. Now, from the sublime to the ridiculous, or perhaps the sublime to the mundane. Now, this is exercise. There'll be more on this later, but I don't know why you'd have an escalator at the front of a gym anyway. But so exercise levels in Australia were becoming very sedentary, and Yossi's going to speak all about this later on. I'm speaking about a mental health point of view, but about 70% of Australians not doing enough exercise to get health benefits from it. And just to make the point that this is one among a number of review papers, the jury is not out on this. Physical exercise is a mental health intervention in itself. It's a powerful antidepressant, but also good for anxiety, helpful for schizophrenia, post-traumatic stress, substance abuse. That is, there's a whole bunch of studies saying that. This is just one review paper among many. Physical exercise on a regular basis is a mental health intervention in itself. So very good for depression, for example. Why, yes, we do have 2 children who won't eat their vegetables. Now, this is what happens to us if we don't eat a healthy diet, all right? One day, a nasty monster comes to the door. Now, Australia's dietary score. Our dietary quality in Australia has been going down for a long time. And our last score was about 59 out of 100. That is way below what would be a pass mark for a reasonable diet. The majority of people are not getting a healthy diet, not enough of all the things. And I won't go into all the details of that because you'll have more about that later on. But just to speak about nutrition and mental health. This was a study, Felicia Jacker at Deakin University, Australian adolescents. They looked at thousands of them. Q1 means that 20% of Australian adolescents who had the best quality diet compared to the 20% who had the poorest quality diet. So those with the poorest diet, after they controlled for everything else, your socioeconomic status, your education, your parents, so everything, all the things they could think of, those with the poor quality diet had about close to twice the risk of getting depression after they controlled for everything else. Poor nutrition, if the body doesn't get all the things it needs to make all the neurotransmitters and chemicals in the brain, then the brain can't make them. And so the brain's depleted on all of these very important things. Particular nutrients, folic acid you get in your green leafy vegetables, for example, omega-3 fatty acids, fish oil and flaxseed oil and so on. All of these things have been found to be actually quite powerful antidepressants. So if a person is not getting enough of those things in their diet and you're trying to treat depression, unless you correct the dietary deficiencies, you don't get a good outcome for the depression as well. Vitamin D is looming as a very large factor as well. And in Australia, we've gone from being worshipping the sun and sunburn and everything, which not good, to almost a sun phobia, where about a third of Australians are significantly vitamin D deficient for not getting enough sunlight, and that is a big risk factor for depression as well. And then so the vitamin D needs to be corrected as a part of the management of depression. So I'm just giving some examples of these kinds of things that are important. Bachelor of Midlife Crisis. Anybody done the Bachelor of Midlife Crisis? Very good. Just a couple of us. All right. Well, I do recommend it to you if you haven't done this course. You can do it by distance learning at Monash if you want to. Connectedness and, say, adolescence. This was a Journal of the American Medical Association, a survey of over 100,000 young people, looking at all the factors that were protective factors against getting into problems with drugs or crime or violence, etc. And what they found was connectedness was a really crucial issue. There were two things: connectedness and a spiritual dimension to their lives. The connectedness, the two big parts of that were connectedness at home or school. And if a young person does not have a sense of feeling connected at home or school, then much greater risk of a whole bunch of other problems. And of all the times, they broke it down, such a thorough survey. Of all the times to be connected, the most important time was the family meal at night. If a family on a regular basis had a meal together at night, then that young person was much less likely to get into other problems. And of course, these things are becoming rare these days, as kids just immediately retreat to the room and just onto the screen, etc. So it's a mammoth. That's an early microscope. So what I've tried to do is give you a case for the obvious, to say all the things you've heard about eating a healthy diet, exercising, getting some sunlight, moderate sunlight, no sunburn, but moderate sunlight on a regular basis, and to practice some mindfulness. You put all of those kinds of things together, social support, connect with community, family, you put all of that together, and that is not only going to be good for mental health, but the side effects are good as well, because it'll be good for heart disease and all of the other chronic conditions that we would like to avoid. Okay, so that's a little bit of an executive summary. Now you're going to get a little bit more detail about these two important areas, but I hope this has been perhaps a useful introduction for you. Thank you very much.
Now, because Craig has been very generous in his time, and he has actually another commitment tonight, I'd like to thank Craig for coming out this evening, and this is a small gift as a token of our appreciation. And as much as everyone here got something out of Craig, I always really enjoy hearing him speak, because it reminds me that, we are doing the right thing here. So thank you very, very much for your time. Thank you. Before we move on to Ruth, to us it's very, very important that people walk off with take-home messages. And the knowledge that you've gained from Professor Craig Hasser tonight may inspire you to want to actually do something, but you're saying, what do I do? So I'm going to make this very, very simple. I'm only going to recommend one book. And there are many, many books on mindfulness and many books on how to actually practice basic mindfulness meditation. But a book that recently came out, which unfortunately we don't have in the library because we don't have 100 copies in case you were going to ask to borrow it, is called Mindfulness in 8 Weeks, and the author is Michael Chackelson, or Chackelson, I don't know. But it is a very, very simple read, and it will take you through 8 weeks of exercises, so you never need to read more than a chapter in a week. Each chapter is maybe 15, 20 pages. And so that's a book that I'd recommend. And for those of you who feel that Craig may have been overdoing it with the whole phone thing and you're not about to sacrifice your phone, I can recommend either the Smiling Minds app or Headspace, which is an English app. Both of those are fantastic DIY, start from 1 or 2 minute long meditation exercises. So what we've gained tonight from Craig is the importance of it. Now, what I find interesting in what he said is that already in 1890, Western psychology was embracing some of the principles that have come to be known as mindfulness in today's day and age. And as he pointed out, 10 years ago, there were maybe 7 studies a year, 20 studies a year, and now there are 700 studies in the past year on mindfulness and the benefits. Over the last 10 years, we've seen something else really take rise in our society, and that is social media. 10 years ago, Facebook was called The Facebook. I bet you didn't even know that. Now it's called Facebook. And along came Pinterest, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, and all the other different methods of being constantly engaged, constantly alert, and constantly looking into other people's lives. And we don't need to harp on the studies that Craig mentioned. But in our tradition, we have an idea that with every sickness that exists in the world, the cure was already placed in the world. And so therefore, if we look at what has risen in the last 10 years, it is both the cure and the response to the problem. And therefore, if you engage in one, it's only right that you engage in the other. But something else that Craig said was that the way we eat is very important. And there are two sides to eating. There's thinking about eating and then eating. When we think about eating, we try to be very optimistic. We try, and then we actually eat. And sometimes we have no idea. Are we eating the right food or are we eating the wrong food? And is this the food that I need for my lifestyle? And is this the food that's going to help me sleep at night and operate well during the day? And for that, we are very honored to have Ruth with us tonight, to actually bring balance to probably the most enjoyable thing that most people still partake in. And so, without any further ado, Ruth, to guide us through the way we eat.
Can everyone hear me? Yes, wonderful. So I just want to say a huge thank you to Spiritgrow for having me this evening. It's the first time that I've spoken here, so thank you for having me. I just want to give you a little bit about my background before I start my talk. So I've spent over 12 years in the health and fitness industry. I started my journey as a professional dancer. I was one of those little girls who always wanted to be a dancer but actually became a dancer. But unfortunately, due to a severe injury, that dance career ended, and now I'm actually kind of grateful that that happened because I wouldn't be here with you tonight if that didn't happen. So it was all meant to be. So my time in the industry has been spent as a personal trainer, a Pilates instructor, and a nutrition therapist. And so tonight, I want to start my talk by asking you a fairly serious question. Don't look so worried. What, right here, right now, what is the state of your relationship? Silence. I'm not talking about your marriage. I'm not talking about your relationship with your friends or even your children. I'm talking about your relationship with food. Oh. Phew! Thank goodness. What an intrusive lady. So it's probably not a relationship that you actually really are aware you even have or even give any time to. So I'm actually really happy to be speaking after Craig because so much of what he just spoke about is extremely relevant to what I want to talk to you about tonight. So I'm guessing that for most of you, you're familiar with the idea that growing up, watching your parents' relationship, how they interact with each other, how they are together, and also how you interacted with them, can affect your relationships in adult life, right? The type of people you tend to be attracted to, you tend to choose, or maybe the type of habits and cycles that you tend to repeat, or maybe even the type of things that go on in your own relationship today. Sometimes we don't necessarily want to admit it, but I know I'm often saying to myself, oh, geez, I'm really turning into my mum. So what does this have to do with your relationship with food? Well, I want to talk to you about a concept called critical period, or a time frame called critical period. You might be familiar with this, you might not. So for those who are not, critical period is what psychologists refer to as a period between birth and the age of 7. So our formative years. And by the age of 7, all of your major belief systems and subconscious habits have developed. All of them. Very scary, right? Anyone got kids between the age of 1 and 7? We've got to get it right in that time frame. After that, it's all over. No. So what's this got to do with your relationship with food? So if your habits and behaviours around your relationships in life are formed during that period, who do you have the most exposure to? Who do you spend the most time with during that period? Parents. Yes. And I want to be very clear, in no way, I'm a mum, so in no way is this about pointing fingers and saying, oh, my parents this or my parents that. It's simply about creating that mindfulness and awareness of where your habits and beliefs and behaviours around food have created your relationship with food now. So I want to share with you, if it's okay, a story from my childhood. And hopefully this also encourages you to see some connections between what's going on now for you and what happened in your childhood. And also I think in making myself vulnerable, it encourages you to feel like it's okay to admit those things to yourself, because that's often the hardest thing to do. So I was extremely privileged with my childhood in that I grew up in a home where healthy eating was just a way of life. I never felt like I was being forced to eat my vegetables or being told you can't eat these foods because they'll make you fat, and then we need to go exercise. We had a fantastic environment. We went hiking as a family. I even had a pony. What a spoiled little brat, right? And I went to my dancing every weekend. But unfortunately, during my dance career, at the age of around 15, I developed an eating disorder. And this is all too common, and you're probably thinking it's very, very common in the dance industry. However, during my treatment for my eating disorder, working with a psychologist, they were asking me about my childhood. Now, initially I thought, well, hang on, I had a great childhood, we ate healthy, I was never told I was fat, any of that stuff. But when we really started to delve deeper, something that came up was my dad's relationship with food, which may be a bit of a surprise to you, rather than it being my mum when it comes to body image and eating disorders. My dad has always been a very, very lean guy. And yes, we would all be eating our vegetables at mealtime, but Dad would have this enormous pile of vegetables, which again, you're probably thinking, that's great. He refused to eat anything else. So he wouldn't eat any animal protein, wouldn't eat any refined carbohydrates, wouldn't eat any fats, wouldn't eat any sugars. And this wasn't because he was super health conscious, just because he was so afraid of eating too many calories. Immediately after he would eat that, he would have to do some kind of exercise. Even if he couldn't get out of the house because he felt he had to stay with the kids and with the family, he would literally be in the kitchen going like this, doing anything he could just to burn off those calories. He would also run everywhere. Now, I'm not talking about going for a run. I'm talking about, I need to go to the post office. I'm going to run there because it burns more calories. So he was always really, really obsessed with staying as lean as possible, and even sometimes would comment on my mum's weight and my mum's appearance, even though she was never any bigger than a size 12, which is by no means obviously an issue. She was a very, very healthy lady. But to my dad, who had these extreme beliefs, he felt like she needed to lose weight. Now, it wasn't until I wasn't aware of any of this being a problem when I was a child. It wasn't until I was taken and put into a position or a space where there was a lot of pressure to look a certain way that these subconscious beliefs and things that I'd been exposed to during my critical period came out and reared their ugly head. Now, it took me a long, long time to get over that eating disorder, and in a similar way to alcoholism, I don't think you're ever completely over an eating disorder, but as Craig was talking about, it's about being mindful with your relationship with food. So I'd like to share another small story with you, a bit more lighthearted, again, so that you can start to be aware of some of your behavioural patterns that may have arisen from your childhood. So my mum is, and always was, one of the most warm-hearted, caring, amazing mums anyone could ever ask for. So when we were unwell as children, she would absolutely shower us with hugs and bring us anything we wanted and go straight out to the chemist and get all the cough medicine or the antibiotics. And on her way out the door, she would say, "Is there anything I can get you, darling, to make you feel better?" And I'd be like, "Oh, Mum, I just really need some salt and vinegar chips. That's the only thing that will make me feel better." So, of course, my beautiful mum came back from the shops with 1 or 2 or 3 bags of salt and vinegar chips, which were not a regular occurrence in our house. We had our one day a week on Sunday where we got to have our treat. But other than that, generally we weren't eating those type of things. So fast forward to my adulthood, and completely honestly, this is something I still do. However, now I'm aware of it and I can control it a lot more. But the penny didn't really drop till probably, if I'm totally honest, maybe 3 years ago. I was going through a particularly stressful 3 or 4 months in my career. And when I'm upset, when I'm super stressed, I'm not feeling very well. What do you think I do? Right, straight to the nearest shop that stocks chips, look through all the other chips, find the salt and vinegar chips, go home, same thing, go home. Now, do you think I have a small handful of chips? No. Do you think I have a small bowl full of chips? No. I eat the entire bag of chips. Now, once in a while, it's not necessarily a problem. But during this period of time, I was super stressed a lot of the time. I was probably doing this 4 or 5 days a week. That's a problem, right? And it took that level of consumption for me to go, why do I go for chips? Why salt and vinegar chips? What's going on with salt and vinegar chips? Aha. And remembered that pattern from my childhood with my mum. And my mum was trying to do the right thing, right? She was trying to express her love and make me feel taken care of. So again, it's not about pointing fingers, it's just about understanding where your behaviours are coming from. So I'd like you to just raise your hand now. You don't have to share anything. If anything kind of just went aha for you. Aha, a few people, right? Cool. Okay, so guys, I'm not here this evening to give you a magic pill or a magic fix. I'm not here even to tell you what to eat or give you a diet. I'd like you to raise your hand again if you've ever tried any shape, form of diet before. Okay, hands back down. I would like you now to, I love it, girl. I'd like you now to raise your hand if you're still sticking to that diet and it is your long-term lifestyle now. Oh, a couple of people, well done. Kudos to you. So, in general, diets don't work. So I'd like to play a little game with you now. I'm going to call out a food, and I just want you collectively to yell out whether it's healthy or unhealthy. I'm not trying to be silly here. Let's have some fun. Chocolate cake. I knew someone was going to say healthy. Paleo chocolate cake, right? What about carrots? Okay, spinach. Big Mac with fries. And throw in a thick shake. Okay, so you've done a very good job of illustrating my point. You guys already know what you should be eating, and you already know what healthy foods are. Would that be a fair statement? Yes. Okay, fantastic. So what I am here to do, I can do my part. I would love to help you guys to start fixing your relationship with food. Is that okay? Yes. Excellent. Pens or phones or something you can write with out. I'm going to give you my top 5 tips to start changing your relationship with food. So the first thing, guys, my number 1, we've already kind of started to work on, is just self-awareness. So sometimes it can be really difficult to admit to your own patterns or even to be aware of them. If you have already, I'm hoping some of you genuinely have had kind of light bulb moments of like, oh wow, I do that too, or oh, I never thought that that was because of this happening in my childhood. I'm really hoping that has happened for you guys. If it has, talk to someone you're close to about it, because admitting it to yourself internally is pretty easy to do. But when you voice it to someone else, they can then go on that journey with you and help to keep you accountable. And that was really my goal in sharing my stories with you tonight, guys, is just, we're all human. Don't be afraid to express those vulnerabilities to someone who you love, and hopefully they can reflect back at you and support you on this journey. So what I would suggest that you do after tonight, and this is number 2, is to start keeping a food diary. Now, you might have done that before if you were on a diet, right? And this is a different type of food diary I'm talking about. So it might seem daunting. You don't necessarily need to get a workbook or anything. I'm so glad Craig's gone, because I'm going to suggest now even just using the notes on your phone. Maybe wait until you've left the cafe so you're not doing this while you're having lunch with someone. But so I want you to write down what you've eaten, how much of it you've eaten, but then also, how were you feeling at the time? Were you feeling stressed? Were you feeling happy? All of these things are really important for you to start understanding your own patterns with food. So ideally, you do this for a very least a week. But if you really want to see some profound patterns show up, I would suggest doing it for 3 to 4 weeks. Again, I know it sounds like a long process, but if you can just use your phone or something, even if you just have a diary in your bag for ladies, something that is easy for you to maintain, then you're going to start seeing your own patterns. So hands up if you know you're a stress eater. A lot of people, okay? So you know you're a stress eater, but when you start keeping this, you're going to see real patterns. So maybe there's a particular food, like the salt and vinegar chips for you. Chocolate, okay? Maybe there's a particular favourite restaurant who you know delivers, and you just call them up when you're feeling super stressed and they deliver food which you know is not ideal, but you order it anyway. Maybe you're the opposite to that. Maybe when you're stressed, you just don't eat. Too much to do, can't fit it in, no. And then I get home at the end of the day, you haven't eaten all day, what's going to happen? You're going to be exhausted, and you're probably going to have an enormous meal and then feel really bad about yourself. Any of this sounding familiar to anyone? Yes. Okay. So that's number 2, guys. Keep a diary. And I really would love for you to actually go on this journey, and I'm going to talk a bit more about that at the end. So number 3 is slow down. Oh, I know, I have to slow down, right? So many things to think about. But what I'm talking about here is more what would happen to your marriage, your relationship with your kids, your friendships, if you just stopped putting any time into them. Not going to be in a very good state, are they? So none of you at the start had even considered that you have a relationship with your food. It wasn't even a conscious relationship, really. So I really want you to think about starting to put time into this relationship and nurturing this relationship. So many of us now, there's so many products available. Up and Go is purely a product created out of the fact that we're all in a rush. We're on the run. We can't even switch off from everything else going on in our world enough to sit down for even just 10 minutes with nothing else going on to enjoy our food. Guys, your relationship with food is what sustains your life. If that's not important enough to make time for, I don't know what is. So if you are someone who's constantly rushing and rushing, you're eating in the car, you're eating at your desk, you're just not nurturing this relationship, I know it's going to feel really overwhelming and like maybe impossible to start doing things differently. But just start small. Just start. It might even just be that you start with breakfast. Breakfast is no longer in the car on the run. You sit down for 5 or 10 minutes and enjoy your food. Yes? Excellent. Okay, my next point is just simply hydration. Now, put your hand up if you need to start your day, with a coffee. No, very good. So, the first thing that goes in your mouth in the morning is a coffee, right? Here is a very simple hack for you to have better hydration. You've boiled the kettle, you're ready to go with your coffee. Have a cup of hot water with lemon immediately before your coffee. And you've probably heard this lots of times before, but something that people often kind of trip up on is feeling like they're hungry when actually they're thirsty. Yeah? And your thirst response is a bit of a strange thing. So if you don't drink water in the first half of the day, you may not actually get thirsty because your thirst response just kind of turns off because you need all these other parts of your brain to get through your day. So your body kind of just dumbs down that thirst response. However, if you start your day before your coffee, shock horror, have that glass of water, it jumpstarts your thirst response. So you're far more likely then for the rest of the day to continue drinking water and stay hydrated. You can have anxiety, headaches, even sometimes depressive tendencies, stomach aches and pains in your joints, the list goes on and on and on, as a result of even slight dehydration. Okay, so this is massive, guys. Really, 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 really important. I feel like I've missed a point, but I don't think I have. So I guess the final point that I just want to leave you with is please, 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 please take action. These are simple, easy to implement things, not rocket science. I would absolutely love, I don't want to use the word connect on social media now after Craig, but again, he's left the room, so it's all good. He'll never know, only because my website's not up yet, but I would love to hear some of your stories and just keep connected with you after this event. So you can go to my Facebook page. Despite the name, guys, please, you are very, very welcome. If you do feel like you need some guidance in terms of what to eat and when to eat it, I do have a clean eating plan that is available on that page. But I feel like for most of you who are pretty well educated in this room, it's more about the behaviours and understanding your relationship with food. So it's the Facebook page. So if the URL is just at the top here. So facebook.com/CTC Real Women. Yes. So on that note, thank you so much for having me and have a wonderful evening, guys.
So I'd like to thank Ruth for sharing. And something that she said reminded me of an anecdotal piece of research that we did here that would not stand any scientific testing, but we did find it anecdotally enlightening. It was after a particularly successful series that we ran on sugar a couple years back. And then we had a follow-up program on fats. And soon after that, we had one of the nutritionists that we like to have come speak, and she said, "Oh, how many of you were at the sugar programming, and how many of you were at the fat programming?" And a whole lot of hands went up. And she said, "And as a result, how many people changed their diet?" Like, no hands went up. No hands. After everything they'd heard from doctors and specialists on fats and sugars, etc. And we took a survey afterwards, and I think what Ruth what she actually said quite explicitly tonight is what we found in the survey, but it was very poignant that you said this tonight. What people came to these programs for was not truly to learn what was right and wrong, but to try to give themselves that final push to actually change. They didn't care to know it was healthy or unhealthy. They were just looking for the excuse to change, and for some people it was the excuse not to change. So really it's not entirely about what we're eating, but as Ruth says tonight, it's actually about the relationship that we have. It's a whole other psychological game that we're having with food, not just about the food that we're putting in our mouth. Although I think as Ruth played with us, tonight we know exactly what we should and should not, or at least most of the time. And so I suppose that's why I'd like to point out in our own spiritual tradition, we have the idea of a bracha, a blessing. It's that point of intention before eating, to acknowledge where the food comes from, to acknowledge that the food has an inherent value. And if you're eating a food that really doesn't have that much value, you have this time to think about, why am I eating it? And then when I'm eating, realizing that it's the food that sustains life. It's not that I'm eating for pleasure. It's not that I'm eating for comfort. It's that I will derive enough energy from this food so that I can continue to proceed as a functional human being. And so just going through that intentionality before eating can actually already change. And it's something that, as Craig said, we've had as part of our tradition for thousands of years. But maybe we just never realized how important it was. So we're thinking about how to think, and we're considering how to eat. And there's a last part to this evening, which is how do we move? And so I'm very, very honored to be able to ask Yossi to share tonight, because Yossi was, at one point in my life, a great influencer. Though not for health, he was my teacher in an earlier part of my life. But one of the things that we love most about Yossi is that when you think of, we're going to get this fitness guru to come in, you think he's going to come in shorts, it's -5 degrees, but he doesn't feel the cold. He's buff, he's got a shaven head, he looks mean, he's got that Indian Eastern tattoo on his arm, he's got all the things that we want, and then we've got actually something much better. You cut me off, that was a comma. What we have is actually the semblance of a balanced individual. Someone who's balanced not only on the outside, but also on the inside. Someone who is both spiritual, but is also taking that to the way he physically lives his life. And so we're very into that. We do try to have speakers who are holistically true. And therefore, I'm very honored to invite, for the fitness component of tonight, Mr. Yossi Klein.
I've got a major challenge. As of last night, there was no chance I was going to be speaking today. You can hear my voice. I've always had a hoarse voice, but my throat is not in the best shape at the moment. Thanks God for your help. Thanks to a lot of hot water, honey, lemon, and ginger today. And today's the Jewish fast day. This is only the second time since I'm bar mitzvah, since I was 13, that I have broken my fast. So only because I felt that my duty was, I was supposed to speak to you guys, and had to make sure it happened. So it was for the greater good. Okay, I wouldn't have done that if it was Yom Kippur, I can tell you. Okay, now first, I've got a major challenge. I was going to show some slides, but I know that some of those slides may offend a couple of guys, so I'm not going to show those slides. Okay, now 2 of you had muffins on your seats. They're the ones I baked today. Needless to say, they're extremely healthy. One of them is gluten-free. If you want to find out the recipe, we can talk later. One of them is gluten-free. One of them is not gluten-free. Okay, just a brief intro about me. My name is Yossi Klein, as many of you may know. Some of you know. I'm the owner of a Healthy Men Fitness Studio, which is in my garage. Needless to say, with a name like Healthy Men, we specialize in training males. I was qualified in 2002 whilst I was still teaching Jewish studies at the Yeshiva College. And I'm still learning to this day, because obviously we all have to keep learning. But I want to give a couple of quick thank yous before I start. I want to thank God for all the blessings in my life. I want to thank my wife for her huge support. Some of you would know her. Gilly's Early Learning Center. That's Gilly. My family for all their support. My coach, Shlomo Gross, a fantastic trainer, and he trains at my gym. My business coach, Joel Gershman. I don't know if he's here. Joel, if you're here. And all my clients. And I also want to thank Spiritgrow for partnering with us in this health seminar. And also a very great thank you to Ruth, who was Clark when she started mentoring me, and mentored me probably for more than 2 years, and is still a good friend. A lot of my knowledge and practice of exercise has got a lot to do with what Ruth taught me. Okay, now to get to the presentation. I want to tell you about a true story. Now, the names are changed, but the story is true. And this story illustrates that effective exercise does not have to take a real lot of time. But we'll talk more about that in a moment. Just, can you put your hands up if you truly and honestly do at least 150 minutes of moderate intensity, at least. You may do more. 2.5 hours a week of moderate intensity exercise a week. That's absolutely fantastic. I'm really pleased to see that. Good. Kain Yirabu, as we say. So it should multiply, and hopefully everybody else will get affected. Okay. After that, my talk is actually going to be pretty short. I'm the third talker, so I've got to keep your attention. But I'm only going to speak for a pretty short time. You all have a piece of paper printed on one side, and that's good because you were able to write Ruth's notes and Craig's notes on the other side. But on the other side, you've got an exercise to do with your partner or by yourself or with the person sitting next to you. But not yet. Let's start with the story. True story. Names are changed. Okay. Marsha. Now, I've never heard of an Australian girl called Marsha. This was an American girl, pretty common name there. Was an engaged to be married young lady. And she worked full-time and she did a lot of voluntary extra work. She had very little spare time in a week. She wasn't wasting time, but she still had very little spare time. So she was getting married in 4 months. She had a fair bit of body fat that she wanted to lose. She wanted to feel good. She wanted to look good. So she had 4 months and she hired a trainer. Next page. She hired a female trainer we'll call Christy. And she said, okay, so how much time can you give me for exercise in a week? She said 30 minutes. 30 minutes. Okay. Can you give me 32 minutes? Yep. I can give you 32 minutes. You know what? We can do it. Now that sounds really, really strange. 32 minutes of exercise and we're going to lose body fat in quite a strong way in 4 months. Okay. But there are some conditions, Marsha. You are going to keep, as Ruth said, a very strict food diary. Not for 4 weeks, but for all those 16 weeks. And you are going to have to agree, signed on a dotted line, to eat exactly, not slowly get used to eating healthy, which is a much probably a better way. But she was desperate to look and feel good in 4 months' time in her bridal gown. So, yep, I'm going to keep to the strict way of eating and drinking. And here's how the workouts go. Let me explain. Monday morning, you're going to come in and guess what? You're only going to exercise for 6 minutes. A little bit of a warm-up, but those 6 minutes are going to be cardiovascular, those type of things like running, jumping, etc. Only 6 minutes. We'll soon explain in a bit more detail. The next day, on the Tuesday, you're going to come in and you know what? You're going to exercise for a whole lot longer, 10 minutes. That's going to be weights, resistance training, lifting and moving weights. Then you're going to have a day off on Wednesday. Then Thursday and Friday is going to be a repeat of Monday and Tuesday. Thursday, you're going to do cardiovascular. You're going to get yourself puffed out in various ways. And Friday, it's going to be moving weights once again for 10 minutes. If you add all that up, you get 32 minutes. But this is the most important part. You're not going to increase the amount of time that you exercise over the next 16 weeks, but you are going to increase the intensity of what you do. In other words, you're going to have to do more and more slowly and gradually, not too gradual, but step by step. You're going to do more and more in the same amount of time. So for example, and we're talking about an American girl, there's no kilometers, we're talking about miles. So let's say Marsha could move and get herself, whether it's walking, jogging, running, a mile in 10 minutes. That's your first time that you do your cardio. Well, there's no time to get used to it. I mean, there is time. You will be able to handle it. We're not expecting crazy and unsafe improvements. The next time you come and do a run, I'm expecting you to do that mile in 10 minutes and 45 seconds. It's probably doable. She's young. She might be in her 20s or 30s. You can improve by 15 seconds by the time you come for your second run. And as obviously she gets fitter, it's going to be harder and harder to improve because that's what happens as you get better and better. But that's how it's going to work. The intensity is going to increase. And the same with the weights, the moving of weights. You might do 10 repetitions on day one. The second time you come in, you might do 11. Or we might lift the weight. It might be 4 kilos. Next time it might be 5. And this goes on for the 4 months. And of course, I will keep a record of your progress. And let's hope if you keep all that up, I'm very confident you'll do it. Well, let's see what happened in the end. And we're talking about a true story, not a made-up story. So Marsha trained for 4 months. Thank God she was well. She didn't have periods where she was unwell. She was pretty lucky. And that means if she did 32 minutes a week, do the maths, in 16 weeks, she trained a total of 512 minutes. What were her results like? Well, guess what? And talking in American terms, and we'll translate it into Australian terms, she dropped 20 pounds, not of weight, but of body fat. That's about 8 kilos just of body fat. It's a fantastic result, and it just shows you what you can do in a very short time. Now, we don't normally recommend people to only exercise in 32 minutes and go hell for leather. Best get to grab a bit of water. Keep going. The Australian government guidelines are actually checked up the United States government guidelines, and this is really interesting. I actually rang up the Misrad HaBriut in Israel, and guess what? For whatever reason, they actually don't have, they have government guidelines for eating, they don't have government guidelines for the average general healthy adult. They do not have, for whatever reason, guidelines for how much you should move and how you should move. But the Australian and the United States guidelines are pretty much identical. And I'll tell you what they are. This is what we normally push people to do. As I said before, minimum 150 minutes to 300 minutes. So that's 2.5 hours to 5 hours of moderate intensity exercise. Or, this is the minimum, 75 to 100 to 150 minutes of intense exercise. So that's probably easier to do than to push in an extreme way and try to get it all done in 32 minutes. It's not easy to do that. Same with nutrition. We don't really expect someone to start eating and drinking perfectly or close to perfectly from the very beginning. Step by step. It's like my son. One of my sons is a bricklayer and he might need his services one day. And I always say it's like building a house. We're building a house right now, thank God. Finally. And it's brick by brick, step by step. Get a habit, get used to that habit. It might take 2 weeks, a very, very small habit. Then 2 weeks later, you might make another small change. Not a change that you say, oh, so hard, I have to give that up. A change that you feel, yep, 9 out of 10 or 10 out of 10, I can do that. Could be something very small. Okay, now comes the exercise. Well, what happens when life gets in the way? In other words, sometimes exercise, it sounds good in theory. So just very quickly, Joel, who I train, used to train with me many years ago when I used to train in Glen Ira Road at a place called Fitness Fever. It's still in existence. Okay, he found it difficult to leave his wife with the kids at night, plus the fact that the group we had, there was no friends in there. They were all nice guys, but none of them were his friends. So he stopped training. But if you fast forward a few years, he now lives in my street, so the gym is just you walk down the street and you're there, and one of his best friends is training as well. So there can be things that get in the way. There's organizational problems or social problems. You don't have a friend to train with, or it's just too difficult to organize your time. So these can be barriers, and that's what we're going to be writing about in a few moments on our sheets. There could be personal problems. I've tried and I've started so many times and it lasts a week. So those are obstacles. We want to find a way to overcome those obstacles. So on your chairs, you've got 4 columns. 3 of those columns we should be able to fill in tonight. You can do it with someone else or by yourself. I hope there's enough pens to go around or you share with somebody. In the first column, what I want you to do is, well, then write on the back, if you've got room on the back. So you want to write a goal or aim. What do you want to be able to achieve, whether it's 4 weeks, 4 months, like Marsha, or in 6 months, or in 3 months. Come up with something that you want to be able to do better, whether it's to keep up with kids or grandkids, or whether it's to be able to run a few Ks, kilometres, whether it's whatever it is for you. You've got to come up with some sort of goal or aim. What would you like to be able to do physically that you can't necessarily do as well today? Then the second column, you've got what about all the problems and barriers? And if you look down the bottom of the page, it gives you some examples. For instance, the environmental barrier. Now we're concentrating not so much on food, we're concentrating on the exercise aspect. I'm not sure how environmental would affect you necessarily, because there's 1,000,001 gyms around in Melbourne, and but if there's something that affects you from the environment and it makes it difficult, organisational barriers will short time and stuff like that. Social barriers, again, it could be like the story of Joel. He hasn't got a friend to exercise with, or personal barriers, whereas I've started 100 times and I haven't been able to do it. Write down your barriers, write down your obstacles, and the third one is going to be to brainstorm all the potentials. Doesn't have to be, it says on a separate sheet of paper, but you can do it there. Come upon some, you've got to really brainstorm as many solutions as you can. Well, the fourth column is really more in 2 weeks' time, for example, or in a month's time. You review your strategies and see how they went. So I'm going to shut up and let you guys do that, and I'm going to be around, and if you need any help, I'm going to... All right, ladies and gentlemen, one of our great teachers at school at Yeshiva College where I went to, his name was Graham Retchford, tremendous teacher. He'd say, gentlemen and others. So anyway, so just before we're going to just show a brief testimonial of one of my clients. No, I don't just train bearded men, all males. That's just an example, okay? Okay, now, ladies and gentlemen, I know you've got a very bit of limited space. Shlomi, I need you, my co. I need you here for 30 seconds. We are going to do 30 seconds of activity, only if you want to, only if you feel comfortable. We're going to do, listen carefully, please. Whatever you might be a bit squashed, you may not be able to do it. Not everyone may be able to do it. It could just be marching on the spot. 30 seconds of what's safe for you. I don't know what level of fitness you're at right now. The most intense you can do in your little space and depending on your fitness. Don't do it if you don't feel comfortable. Don't do it if it's not right for you. But if you feel like you can, we're only going to do 30 seconds. Shlomi's timing us. Okay? Tell us when to start. I've got a bigger area than you. I'm lucky. Whatever you want. 30 seconds. 3, 2, 1, go. Give yourselves a clap. Okay, okay, we're almost done.
Probably just tell them to listen because otherwise.
Just give this guy your attention for a moment, please. We're almost done.
Going to Healthy Men is great for me. Keeps me healthy and strong. It's local, convenient. Yossi's always there to encourage me and is easy to work with to adapt the exercises for my ability and needs. I feel healthier, more energized and happier as a result of going to Healthy Men, and I definitely recommend it.
Thank you. Thanks, David. I'm still puffing. Okay. Now, we all puff. Even Usain Bolt will puff after his 100-meter dash. Okay, we made some booklets, which just gives very briefly our services. It may look a bit wordy, but I time myself reading it, and it's just over 2 minutes to read. So you have a brochure at the back that gives all our services. There's some sheets if you're more interested in our services, but you could fill in your details, name, number, whatever. I'm going to be here I'm happy to stay for a few minutes and talk to anyone who wants to ask me any questions. We've got some cards there, my business cards, if you want any more information, available. Okay.
Just before we wrap up, there is, remember how Ruth said, I'm sure there's one more thing. No, there isn't. Well, there is. So I'm going to allow Ruth just to share that.
Thank you. I knew there was one thing, but I didn't want to stare at my notes for too long. And I said I was going to give you 5 actionable things, so here's the 5th. And it's just because it's really quite profound often for a lot of people. So I suggest that you do this. Find some time when you're not going to be disturbed, the kids aren't going to be screaming, you can be in peace and quiet. Just either have a think or write down what happened for you in your childhood around food and kind of delve into it. So, it started out for me, yes, I had a great childhood and we ate healthy food and it was all wonderful, but upon reflection in adult life, there were actually a couple of pretty impactful things that showed up in my adulthood, and it will probably be the same for you. So it may be that your parents were those type of parents that were like, you're not leaving the table until you've eaten everything on your plate. So now, as an adult, you must finish everything on your plate. Or maybe they were super, super strict and never let you have lollies or chocolate or anything like that. So as soon as you became an adult and moved out, you were like, right, well, there's no one here to tell me not to eat lollies, so I'm going to eat a bag full of lollies. So whatever it is, yeah. So whatever it is for you, and, I'm being quite playful and jokeful about this, but sometimes it can be fairly serious habits. So there you go. That was the 5th thing. I wanted to make sure you get all 5 things. Thank you again.
So when Deepak Chopra spoke for Spiritgrow a while back when he was visiting Australia, he spoke about epigenetics and the impact of our grandparents on us. So if we're thinking about our relationship with food as a kid, I'm scared as a community to think about our grandparents' relationship with food and the impact that has on us as well. I'd like to thank Ruth and Yossi, and in absentia Craig, for coming out and giving us so much time this evening, and for it's one thing to present a whole talk. It's another thing to be able to distill it down to a few points so that people actually have a take-home message. And so I'd like to thank both Yossi and Ruth for coming out this evening and sharing. Thank you, Yossi. Thank you, Ruth. And I'm going to ask that both, if Yossi and Ruth don't mind, that they do linger behind so that anyone that does have a question can approach. Do you mind? So if you do have a question, please do come forward, ask, don't be shy, introduce yourself. I hope that everyone walks off tonight with something that will lead to change already this evening or possibly tomorrow. Don't open the bag of chips. Be conscious about your lemon juice and water tomorrow morning. Do 6 minutes of exercise when you do wake up. Whatever it is, please let tonight have been a result of change and not just another lecture. Thank you very much. Good night.